of the Child Safety Link webinar series. My name is Samantha Noseworthy, and I am a health promotion specialist with Child Safety Link, and I'm going to be moderating our webinar today. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are all treaty people who benefit greatly from the shared resources of this land, covered by the treaties of peace and friendship. I'm also just going to address a few housekeeping items before we get started. So firstly, this presentation will be recorded and the session will be available to view afterward. It'll be on our website. We also ask that you mute your microphone for the duration of the presentation. And it's up to you if you'd like to turn your camera off, that's fine. If you'd like to keep it on, we'll leave it up to you. And lastly, if you do have questions during the presentation, we ask that you just type them in the chat box and we'll be monitoring that. And there will also be time at the end of the presentation for a bit of a Q&A period. And at that point, if you want to turn on your mic and your camera and ask your question that way, that's totally fine. So I'd just like to provide a very brief summary of Child Safety Link. So Child Safety Link is an injury prevention program at IWK Health, and we are dedicated to reducing the incidence and severity of unintentional injury to children and youth in the Maritimes and Atlantic where appropriate. Child Safety Link is committed to working with community organizations, government, and other partners to ensure that children are as safe as necessary at home, on the road, at play, and at school. Our at-home work includes things such as poisoning and falls prevention. Our on-the-road work includes child passenger safety and pedestrian safety. Our at-play work includes helmet safety, concussion prevention, and ATV safety. And finally, our at-school work is new and still evolving, but we will be addressing all of our topic areas within the school context. So this month actually marks Child Safety Link's 20th birthday. We launched Child Safety Link on November 20th, the International Day of the Child. And to celebrate, we've decided to host this webinar series in order to highlight the importance of child injury prevention and to promote the work of Child Safety Link. So I'm now going to introduce our presenters for the day before I turn it over to them. So first up, we have Dr. Jessie-Lee McIsaac. Dr. McIsaac is an assistant professor within the Faculty of Education and Department of Child and Youth Study at Mount St. Vincent University. She holds a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Early Childhood Diversity and Transitions, and she also directs the Early Childhood Collaborative Research Centre. The goal of her mixed methods research program is to engage families and partners in policy and practice to enhance early childhood well-being. Our second presenter today is Milena Pimentel. Did I say that right, Milena? Okay, great. Milena is currently enrolled in the Child and Youth Study program at MSVU, and she is a research assistant at the Early Childhood Collaborative Research Center. Milena was born and raised in Bermuda, and she is of Brazilian ethnicity. Her research interests include social and emotional development and well-being of young children, as well as culturally responsive and anti-racist pedagogy. So welcome to the both of you. Thank you so much for agreeing to present today. We're really excited to hear more about this topic. So I will turn it over to you both and you can get going on your presentation.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction and the welcome to your webinar series. I didn't realize that we were the last one, so this is kind of exciting. I'm really pleased to be here, and I'll just get going while Milena fiddles with getting our presentation up there so we don't delay. So we're happy to be here today sharing with you a project that Milena and I have been working on with our colleagues at Dalhousie University with the On These Shoulders Research Collaborative, which is led by Dr. Barb Hamilton Hinch, who's an associate professor in the School of Health and Human Performance at Dalhousie. And we also have our colleague and co-investigator, Crystal Watson, who is a PhD candidate in the Faculty of Health at Dalhousie University, and our two research coordinators and assistants, Nicholas Hickens and Emma Sterling Cameron. So together, we have been working on this project for the last couple of years. The idea started pre-pandemic and really grew into this really, interesting and important project right now, looking at amplifying the voices of Black families and educators in Nova Scotia. And so we're going to be presenting research to you today, and we'll tell you a bit about our journey with sharing the research to community as well. And we do have a few discussion questions. If there's a bit of a lull in discussion, we've sort of added some provocations to share with you today. So this is us. Melina and I both work at the Early Childhood Collaborative Research Center, which is a function of my research chair position here at Mount St. Vincent. And as I mentioned, we've collaborated with Dalhousie, the On These Shoulders Research Collaborative. The work was funded by the Inter-University Research Network, which is a funding pocket through the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development. So Melina, I'll get you to move on. So we did, thank you for giving that land acknowledgement. We do always situate our work in the land in which it was conducted, which is in Mi'kma'ki on the ancestral unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. We also pay respect to the histories, contributions, and legacies of African Nova Scotian communities that have been here for over 400 years, and the 52 African Nova Scotian communities throughout the region today. So in terms of some background of the work, so I mentioned this work really has been really an idea that we've been working on over the last couple of years, and that has been fueled by this funding through the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development, which is focusing on redressing student achievement gaps and looking at effective strategies to close achievement gaps. However, in our research, we are reframing achievement gap among Black learners as more of an opportunity gap to really shift the focus on not the achievement of students, but the lack of and the gap in opportunities that impact Black learners in the province. And really, this work is framed on the early childhood period, given the knowledge that we have about that critical period of development that happens in the early years and the importance it plays on a child's overall well-being, achievement in their lifetime. We also feel like the opportunity gap better represents the problem with the system that is creating the gap for learners and children rather than the emphasis on being on the child themselves. So we know there's been lots of research that has illustrated this gap that exists, given that many of you are located within the IWK or connected to the IWK. You might be familiar with the One Chance to be a Child report. We've put the link there. This report that was released just this past year, as well as a research article that we've cited there at the bottom, has helped to illustrate some of the gaps that exist within our systems for Black learners in Nova Scotia and Black children in communities. And the One Chance to be a Child report actually has a section focused on the well-being of African Nova Scotian children and youth, which I really encourage you all, if you haven't had the opportunity to take a read of it. Dr. Hamilton Hinch was involved in the sort of supporting that section, the spotlight section for the One Chance to be a Child report. And it really is a really important read for situating ourselves in this work. So as well as this knowledge that we have about the opportunity gaps, the fact that we know that children experience gaps within the school system, and this continues throughout their school experience. We also know the emphasis on early childhood has certainly been accelerating over the past couple of years. So with the Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare Agreement, there's been a real emphasis and a spotlight on early learning and childcare systems and on the early childhood period more broadly, and the opportunity there is to focus on the creation of an accessible, affordable, high quality system. And what I think we are trying to do in some of the work that we're doing at the Early Childhood Collaborative Research Center and through this project is really shine a light on the aspect of programs that relate to cultural responsiveness and cultural safety. And we'll mention this term a couple times throughout the project. And really that focus on cultural responsiveness as being a really important part of how we think about creating opportunities for children during the early childhood period. So our focus in this research project, so sort of that foundational work of our knowledge of this gap that exists for Black learners and Black children in the province, as well as the attention on early childhood, led us to this focus of our research project. So our goals were to understand the experiences of early childhood educators and parents in Nova Scotia who have and who care for young Black children. And we had 3 focus areas of our work. The first was a focus on outdoor and risky play. And this is a keen interest for one of our co-investigators, Crystal Watson. Melina and I are filling in today for her as she wasn't able to attend. And this area of outdoor play and risky play is of real interest to Crystal. She's pursuing a research project as part of her PhD that's looking at risky play among young Black girls. And in this project, we were really curious about this emphasis on outdoor play and risky play among Black communities and among Black children, and what that meant. And we certainly know, those of you might be familiar with this increasing attention internationally on the importance of providing children with opportunities for unstructured, active outdoor play. In Canada, this has really been fueled by Participaction's position statement on active outdoor play, which happened a few years ago now, back in 2015. And over the last few years, I would say since then, there's been a real attention on the importance of the outdoor environment and lots of new initiatives that have focused on this outdoor space. And then in addition, the participation statement, it really expresses that, providing opportunities for active play in nature and outdoors, along with its associated risks, is really important for healthy child development. And before I go on to the other emphasis, I just wanted to take a moment to define what I mean by risky play. I'm not sure sort of where everyone's situated in their work, but for us, risky play and how it's defined in the literature are things that involve thrilling and exciting forms of physical play that involve uncertainty and do have the potential for injury. And this can include sorts of risky play, such as play at great heights, play with high speed, play with dangerous tools, play with plain or dangerous elements, and rough and tumble play. So there's different components of risky play that have been defined in the literature, and we were interested sort of how this was understood in this project, and what were some of the experiences of families and ECEs with respect to children engaging in risky play from a Black learner perspective. What's important with risky play, as well as its potential contributions for overall development, is that children have the opportunity through this type of play to explore their own boundaries, learn through their capacities, through mistakes, and develop persistence and resilience. So there's a good amount of literature that demonstrates some benefits of risky play. So that was why this question in particular was of interest. Our second area of focus was around racism and discrimination and how that was experienced by Black children and families in Nova Scotia during the early years. And then the third focus was specifically looking at early learning and childcare environments for Black children. And both with the second and third question, there isn't a lot of current research that has really unpacked that. There's been several reports that have looked at the school system and the implications for Black learners within the school system, but a lot less information is known about experiences within the early childhood period and also within the early learning and childcare system itself. So childcare, pre-primary, those sorts of environments that children have access to. So the next slide talks about our critical framework. So in this work, we used a qualitative research approach that was informed by critical race theory and Black critical theory. So this is a critical theoretical perspective that was developed by Black and African Nova Scotian, African American scholars in the mid-1970s to really uncover and identify manifestations of racism in public systems. So it's a theoretical framework that's existed for a while, and it allows us to take a critical lens to the data that we collected to really start to unpack how racism occurs within the existing public systems. So critical race theory is a conceptual framework that is useful as a lens for researchers that are working with race-based data. So if you've encountered any other projects from this perspective, you might have learned a little little bit more about critical race theory through that. And really by conducting research using principles of critical race theory, it helps us to dig into data with this lens, with this approach. Our research was really guided by these 5 tenets of critical race theory with a focus on anti-Black racism. So the first tenet was looking at racism, and more specifically anti-Black racism, and thinking about the fact that it is endemic and foundational within social, economic, historical, and cultural spaces and dimensions, critical to identify where and how this is presenting and working. The second aspect of that we looked at this research project was through a lens of storytelling, and talking to those with lived experiences and recognizing the power of telling stories. The third aspect is really a focus on fighting for equity and addressing the prevailing narratives of colorblindness. One that requires going beyond kind of the neutral standpoint of colorblindness. And then the fourth is that experiences from people who have been marginalized must be heard. So really focusing on providing an opportunity to voice those experiences from those that have experienced marginalization is a really critical part of critical race theory. And then finally, a commitment to social justice and action. So you'll see this through our community presentation, and also, we endeavor in this work to produce knowledge for research, but also to share that knowledge and to mobilize that information to help inform change, to help inform policy change. So we've done a number of things that we'll share at the end about what we've been up to share these findings, to raise profile to the voices, to ensure that the stories are told. So our research project looked at, as I said, it was a qualitative research study. So we conducted interviews with parents of Black children and early childhood educators that work in African Nova Scotian communities. And this research was conducted in the summer of 2021. So if you think back a little bit ago, we were still, some COVID restrictions were still in place. So most of our interviews were conducted by phone. We worked with partners and family resource centers, and we used social media to recruit participants to take part in a telephone or a Teams interview. And this slide here identifies an overview of our participants. We were interested in speaking to, and I mentioned this in the beginning, speaking to parents that had a child with experience in a childcare center, a family day home, and or pre-primary. And altogether, we had 15 participants, 7 parents, and 8 early childhood educators. For our ECE sample, or early childhood educators sample, about half of our sample identifies as Black or biracial or African descent, and 4 identified as white, working in a community of African Nova Scotian children. And we had participation from across Preston Township, across HRM more broadly, and 2 were from rural Nova Scotian communities. And our 7 parents of Black children, the majority of were within the broader HRM, you can see there. And we did have the majority of participants that identified as mothers. Okay, so Milena is going to, I think, launch into the results now. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll go into the results, which focus on each of the 3 goals that we looked at in this study. So just starting with outdoor play for Black children in Nova Scotia. One of the themes that came up in our study was that families and ECEs, early childhood educators in African Nova Scotian communities, really value outdoor play for their children. Each bullet point does have a quote, and I'll leave the slide up just for a couple of minutes for you guys to really read that and see. Those are participant voices. And participants really spoke fondly about their own experiences with outdoor play as young children, parents and early childhood educators alike. And then participants described personal experiences growing up in Black communities where unsupervised and free play was encouraged and this was normalized. And the second bullet point speaks to the fear that families have of over-policing and stereotyping and over-surveillance. So they discussed their fears about allowing Black and African Nova Scotian children to engage in risky play due to the consequences that are associated with potential injuries. And further, participants shared the story of over-surveillance of Black parents across various systems. And then we also learned that there were limited play spaces for Black and African Nova Scotian children to engage safely in outdoor play due to negative interactions, a lack of inclusive spaces, and unsafe infrastructure. So participants talked about that in their communities, they had not seen like the same upgrades and amenities that other communities throughout the province have had, such as improvements and of playgrounds, recreation centers, and parks. So this goes into our second goal, which of the study, which speaks to families and early childhood educators' experiences with early childhood settings. So we learned that participants felt that there was a mainstream approach to curriculum. So parents and early childhood educators noted the pervasiveness of white normativity in these settings, such as through the curriculum and programming. And Black ECE specifically discussed the challenges that they have encountered in infusing an Afrocentric approach into their programs, which they often received pushback from their colleagues or from the program director supervisors when trying to do so. And lastly, parents expressed their desire, though, for a curriculum and program that would allow for their child to embrace and celebrate their Black identity. The second bullet point speaks to the lack of responsiveness to racism, social justice, and equity in these early learning spaces. So ECs noted incidents of racism amongst children, and white ECs indicated feelings of unpreparedness in addressing these issues. ECs and parents reported the lack of acknowledgement of cultural and heritage celebrations in their childcare programs. And the last bullet point under this goal was the absence of cultural safety. So this is parents and ECs reflecting on the diversity in early learning and childcare settings, often linking the importance of representation to children's sense of belonging. Parents discuss the stigmas and stereotypes, especially in the context of hair that they have encountered in childcare settings. And parents expressed concern for how their children were being treated differently than their peers by educators, which essentially means that they were often being reprimanded for incidents that are considered developmentally appropriate. So an example of that would be biting. And our last set of findings under the racism and its impact on Black families in Nova Scotia, we found that there are intergenerational impacts. So Black and African Nova Scotian parents and educators expressed fears and concerns about their children due to the racism and discrimination they themselves have faced, which creates this cycle of fear. And participants knew that their children would eventually encounter racial violence or injustice, just as they had experienced and their parents before them. So this was continuing and continuing through generations. So families felt a great sense of unease and stress parenting a Black child in a space where anti-Blackness remains prevalent. And experiences of racism across systems. So nearly every parent, participant, and ECE could recall a racist incident that impacted their child or another child in an early childhood environment. This manifested often through implicit biases, overt use of hate speech, racially abusive language, over-punishment of children, and racial profiling. Families had reported negative experiences in the healthcare system, and children encountered racism in childcare spaces. So overall, and in all of these areas we explored, parents discussed an emphasis on the importance of positive self-identity and cultural pride. So parents felt that the best thing that they could do to support their children, knowing that they were raising their child in this anti-Black society, in a sense, was to really bolster their sense of confidence and sense of Black pride. Parents really talked about promoting and engaging in resistance and advocacy against normalizing whiteness, and worked to promote and advocate for inclusive, safe spaces for their children. Parents knew that they would be raising their child in a space that were often majority white and non-diverse. So I'll hand it back to Jessie-Lee just to go into our key takeaways from the findings that we had in the study.
So for the purposes of today's presentation, we've tried to synthesize some of the takeaways that we thought might be most relevant to this group, but certainly we'll give you our link to our report, which gives a whole host of sort of overall findings. But some of our takeaways that we wanted to highlight today was the experience. So Black children's experiences with racial discrimination, stereotyping, stigma, over surveillance, and what that means for a child's identity and autonomy. We also wanted to highlight the intergenerational trauma and fear that exists among Black families in the early childhood period that relates to play. And I think when Samantha was mentioning sort of the focus of the child safety link, perhaps this might be an intersection. What kind of prevents that that aspect of play or influences how Black children play and how families feel about their play, I think really was identified in this project. And as a result, that really reinforces that cycle of oppression for historically African Nova Scotian neighborhoods specifically, and also for Black families more broadly. We also saw inequitable opportunities for engagement in outdoor play that's really still pervasive in early childhood for Black children in Nova Scotia. So that includes in neighborhoods and communities, and also in early childhood programs and systems. And then finally, the mainstream or Eurocentric approaches and that curriculum is offered through, or programs tend to be offered through, the dominant discourse of play, even the notion of risky play and outdoor play, really sort of reinforces an ignorance to the issues at hand and the racism that exists, and the implications of an emphasis of these things that sort of negates the experiences of Black families. And these sort of pervasive colorblind attitudes and implicit biases not only negates the experiences, it also ignores the disparities and socioeconomic inequities that are present within early childhood systems, but also more broadly health systems, education systems across the province and across the country. So in terms of critical policy actions, so, this is all, I'm really excited to get into the discussion because I'm curious to hear, if anything's surprising to you, if it reinforces some of what you've been wondering about in your own kind of experiences and roles that you all play. I think one of the, there's been a lot of discussion over the last few years around anti-Black racism. What we've tried to do is really highlight the experiences during the early childhood period, and also identify leverage points for action. And this is what this slide really makes an effort to do, is identify, how do we kind of identify action points to address some of these opportunity gaps, if I go back to my earlier point, moving forward. So one of the things that we think is really important based on the results of this work is the aspect of storytelling and counter narratives. So really continuing to voice the needs of Black children, families, and educators, and those stories really needing to be heard. And that was a real a point of our research project was to share those experiences, to make those voices, to leverage those voices so that we have an understanding of the current situation and the ways that we need to move forward to create equitable systems, and thinking about prioritizing funding for African Nova Scotian communities. Alongside of that is thinking about how we can address the lack of infrastructure, address stereotyping and racism, and really an emphasis on improving cultural safety. And we've talked about this a little bit in conversations with the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development. So the aspect of cultural safety, and really fostering and empowering Black children to embrace culture and identity. And then the other aspect is things like this: professional development, sharing opportunities to discuss these issues, both with early childhood educators and other service providers that work with young Black children and their families, to really be thinking about how we can go about delivering Afrocentric and culturally responsive programs. So one example of a presentation we did is with the Afrocentric Early Childhood Education cohort, which is run through NSCC. And that's a great example. It's one example of a really important action that is supporting early childhood educators, Black early childhood educators, creating that safe space, that cultural safety for them. But really important to that also is within their cohort, creating that safety of learning about early childhood, but also supporting that translation into practice when students graduate. So I think that's another really important point to make, as we, building these Afrocentric cohorts is really important. And we also need to be thinking about how we kind of bridge that into current practice more broadly. So some of the things that we've been up to, so as I said, we did a number of different presentations to groups in July of 2022. So just this past July, we held an event in East Preston where we met with community. We were really as an opportunity to highlight some results. We had an exhibit. So on the next slide that Milena will share in a minute, we sort of had all of our results up, the quotes from participants, which are really important to highlight, and that's why our quotes in our presentation took precedence over, words from us. The voices from participants are really important to highlight in these experiences, and we did that through an exhibit of quotes and results during the community event. It was a family-friendly event. We had a great turnout of community members and those working in early learning and childcare, and more broadly to support families of African descent and families more broadly in Nova Scotia. And we also had a graphic facilitator at the event who produced this graphic. So essentially, participants were asked to reflect on questions, what's currently happening to support African Nova Scotian learners and African Nova Scotian families, and then what needs to happen. So you can see on the left, it's what's currently happening. So there was a generation in the event of ideas, things that were currently happening. So you can see at the very top left that Afrocentric EC cohort is one of those examples. And then the aspect of, so what needs to happen to further address some of the issues that were raised both through this research project and also that we know to be those issues that we know to just be real right now for African Nova Scotian learners. So this aspect was a really important part of helping our team to identify potential next steps that we might be able to help support moving forward, whether it be more knowledge mobilization or additional research or work with partners. And a really important part of this project was also, and a part of this process was also a bit of what we call in research member checking. So checking in with participants to see, did we miss anything? Is there anything else that we need to kind of raise profile to as we move forward with this work? So this was a really exciting event that we did, and the next slide just shares a few photos of sort of how the exhibit was set out, our graphic facilitation in action, and also for you to learn more about the project. Samantha has our slides, so she's welcome to share that out to participants. If you just take your phone and scan the QR code there, that will also take you to our deliverables. So we have sort of a section on our website that talks about the project a little bit more, and we also have a community report that that provides more context to the work and more voices from participants. So that's it from our formal presentation. I think we were right at 35 minutes. At least it's 1:35 on my clock. That was good planning on our part, I guess. And we can end there with a question and answers. And if, as I said, if there's a lull, we do have a few just questions that we can put out there. But maybe we'll just stop here and see if there are any questions from participants. Oh, a hand already went up.
Hi, thank you so much for that great presentation. Actually, I don't really have a question, more of a comment. So
Yeah.
I really was pleased that you referenced the One Chance to be a Child report,
Good.
Child Safety Link, because this is a webinar series. That was actually our first webinar, was on the One Chance to be a Child report. So that was really nice to show that link and reference. And the other thing I just wanted to say is that a few of us recently attended the Canadian Injury Prevention Conference in Vancouver. And it was really interesting because one of the themes that sort of arose, you could kind of see it arising, was the need and the importance and power of storytelling. So it was interesting that you also brought that up. And so I just wanted to mention that because it really did come through pretty clearly at that national conference about the importance of storytelling. So just some comments.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And as a qualitative researcher, I love that. I think we sometimes, as a default, look for, stats about the prevalence of things. And while that is important in starting a conversation, I think the experiences of people in communities, the first voice experiences are so important to highlight. So I really am glad to hear that resonated with you, and glad to hear at a national level that is coming through too.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure there's got to be some questions.
And if it helps to provoke maybe discussion a little bit. So some of the things that please feel free to do your questions in the chat. We're happy to do that. Some of the things that we're always curious about as we do these types of presentations is learning a bit more about what's currently happening to support Black children and families in communities. We love to hear those stories, and that just helps us to gain an understanding of initiatives that are underway. And then that question that we asked our participants as well in the community event is, what do you think are some of the solutions and actions that we need to be doing to move forward to better support Black children and families in the province? So I'll leave those as just, if you have any ideas to share, if it's not a question about a research, but just a thought that you're having about those two aspects, we'd love to hear that too.
I know that Child Safety Link has done car seat technician training in some Black communities. I'm terrible. I can't think of off the top of my head when those occurred, but I know that we've done that, and I know we've also supported different communities around car seat safety, especially, and promoted that work. And then I know a few years ago we conducted an engagement project. We conducted virtual discussions with folks who work with families, so primarily family resource centers, but I know there were some other groups in there, and I know that we had some voices from the Black community, but it was minimal, I would say, in terms, we didn't interview that many people. I don't have it in front of me, so I think there was 5 sessions, about 45 participants maybe. I might be off on that, but And then the only other stuff that we would do maybe specifically, and this seems very minor, but we do try our best to represent all communities in all of our educational resources, and we do constant photo shoots to ensure that we have great diversity in this province, so and Atlantic Canada. So we do try our best to represent all the communities.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Just to put another thought out there, I was thinking about this notion of risky play with Child Safety Link, and you know, the reality of risky play is and I'd be curious just about this bit, if that came up actually at your national conference at all. And I think one of the and you know, Crystal had hoped to be here, but she just wasn't able to do it. And it's one of her emphasis, and I think this has been really interesting in this project, is while the discourse on the importance of risky play is, and I mentioned this during the presentation, is being promoted at sort of a national level. And I certainly here, I think we hear a lot about the importance of risky play in Nova Scotia. What that means to say, you know, encourage your child to engage in risky play to a family who experiences over surveillance and a concern of what that means with a potential risk of injury, which is inherent in risky play, is really important to be thinking about. So I think as we talk about this importance of risky play, we need to really be thinking about what that means for a family where they can't actually, you know, that they feel really, they struggle with that aspect of allowing that risky play because of their experience, you know, in the past with health systems and education systems and what that means. So I did want to emphasize that link as well, because I feel like that might be relevant for this audience.
Yeah, a Child Safety Link, we've dabbled a little bit in risky play over the years, and we have a position statement, or I can't remember what it's called, but some kind of a statement on our website around risky play and the importance of risky play. And we are trying to sort of change our language around how we provide messaging to families. So I think it used to be people would think you got to keep your child as safe as possible, and we don't say that anymore. We kind of say as safe as necessary, and it's just a small change, but it's we do encourage, we do talk about preventing not all injuries. Some injuries are fine, like minor injuries, bumps and bruises, scrapes, all that stuff is fine and important. And so we do preface the work we do with that. And so there's still lots to be done for Child Safety Link in that area and for the injury prevention field. So obviously, I'm sure you're very aware of Dr. Mariana Bersoni, who started the whole field of risky play, I guess. And she in Canada, and she's a injury prevention researcher initially and works at the BC Injury Prevention and Research Unit. And we've worked with Mariana for the last 20 years, and she was at the conference and we chatted, and she presented on risky play and outdoor play. And so it's very much more in the conversations of injury prevention across the country, that's for sure.
I see Nancy there, who we met with the Read to Me program. Gosh, that was like last week or the week before. Thanks, Nancy, for that comment. So just the aspect around books and representative content. No, that's great, Nancy. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I guess more just a comment from me as well. It's making me think about some of the work I'm doing currently with schools around active transportation safety and pedestrian safety. And thinking about, we have these leadership teams developed, but there hasn't really been a conversation around the different kind of experiences that like Black students may be bringing to that specific aspect of safety, and how it would really be valuable to have that point of view as part of the leadership committee, and how we're really only seeing this issue and hearing the concerns of, mainly white parents, and how we're really missing a huge segment of our student population by not including those folks and assuming that they have the same experience as our white elementary students. So it's just, Yeah, I'm just here kind of reflecting on what you said. It was a really great presentation, so thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you, Samantha. Yeah, absolutely. I think we have to remember who typically shows up to, to volunteer to things like that are those that don't experience barriers to participation. So I think that's a constant work for us that work in health promotion and education is to continue to find ways to leverage the voices of folks who experience marginalization, and that takes, it takes different kinds of engagement opportunities, I think, and different ways of doing things that we need to continue to work on. And I mean, even this research project, we recognize that it's the voices of only, those participants that identified and had the time to talk to us, and received it on social media. So there's lots of limits to, even the voices that we heard in this particular project. So, yeah. Thank you.
I'm just wondering also if you're able to speak to, I know you had identified, sorry, I think in your previous slide, some of the, I guess, the action items,
Yeah.
perhaps? Yeah. I'm just wondering, are there any other specific research questions that you're going to be addressing in the future, or you hope to address in the future that you might be able to share a little bit?
Such a great question. Yeah, Milena and I have many conversations about it. So I think for now we've been doing these kinds of conversations to figure out, where are the opportunities, where's the current actions that we can support. So I think one of the examples of, for example, the Afrocentric cohort is a really great one to understand how that helps to shift the early childhood educator kind of practice and to support their, as I mentioned, the translation of their learning in a cohort, an Afrocentric cohort, and that translation into the community. So that's one thing that we're really curious about. The Department of Education and Early Childhood Development is also rolling out curriculum modules that relate to culturally responsive programs. So we're really curious about that. The impact with respect to changes in knowledge that might provide for early childhood educators working in early learning and childcare programs. So another aspect in terms of, we see this in terms of professional development, education sessions as being an important step, but not the only step that needs to be taken. So I think those of you working in health promotion, which might be many of you, know that like you can do training sessions and workshops that doesn't necessarily lead to behavior change and systems change. So I think in addition to professional development that seems like it's underway through the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development, we are really curious about how to support educators and service providers more broadly with that really tricky piece about knowing that you need to address anti-Black racism, but the how to do it with young children, with colleagues that are at different places, with the recognition of what we need to do and what's best practice in doing this, and really working with educators to build their confidence to support the translation of that into practice. So that's, I know, a curiosity that I have. Some of our other projects at the center have been working with ECEs in more of like a coaching model to not only, share best practice, but also to support them where they're at, to be able to have the confidence to lead spaces that really address anti-Black racism in a real way. So I think that's some of the, I don't exactly know what that looks like in practice, but I think that's a really important piece for me, because I think the uncomfortable feeling for those of us that are not Black experience in this anti-Black racism is confronting that and being having the tools to be able to address it when it occurs, when racism occurs, and to be able to know how to create that safe environment for families. So I think that translation piece is part that I'm really curious about. Milena, I don't know if you have anything else to share.
Yeah, and so I guess I'll speak to just my education around, I'm doing an honors thesis and we'll be exploring the same data, specifically trying to understand the experiences of the Black early childhood educators that we spoke with, and what their experiences look like working as an early childhood educator. So all of what Jessie-Lee said, I'm also really interested in the cohort that just graduated and where they go from their graduation and what their experiences look like, and how it does translate into practice and how they're supported and in these early learning environments, as well as anti-racist pedagogy. I think what you said, Jessie-Lee, just supporting early childhood educators, all early childhood educators, to be comfortable in having these being comfortable and having uncomfortable conversations, I would say. It's critical, like we need to have these. So yeah, those are my areas of interest.
The aspect of cultural safety seems to resonate with a few people that we've talked to as well. So along with that, I think really focusing on how to make our communities more safe, culturally responsive and safe for our Black students and children and their families and ECEs. That's, I think, another aspect that we'd love to unpack a little bit. What does that look like for, what does that mean, and how can we get there to create more culturally safe communities? Go ahead. Yeah, I think the hands up. Yeah,
I know we're running out of time, so I'll just
That's
be
okay.
really quick. So I wanted to mention that Child Safety Link every year does do a presentation to the early childhood educators. I guess I'm not sure what it's called, the college.
Yep.
And we do presentations there every year. But I also wanted to mention a couple of years ago, just before COVID hit, Mariana Bersoni, there was Dalhousie people, including I'm really losing people's names here, but the dean of the School of Health Promotion, and others brought in Mariana Bersoni, and she did several presentations across the HRM, including we did one at the IWK, and we spoke and others spoke. Dr. Strang spoke and others around the importance of risky play. And then one of the ladies though who helped organize it was Jane Cawley, who used to be, I think, the chair or the president, I don't know her name, her title for the early childhood education. So I know that there's been connections that way specific to risky play and early childhood development folks. So just wanted to throw that out there, and I'm sure you were aware of that, but I just wanted to bring it up just in case not.
Yeah, it would have been Michelle Stone at Dalhousie University.
Stone,
right. That was leading that work. So I work pretty closely with Michelle on a couple different projects. So I think that her work in risky play, we actually co-wrote a paper together with a student that I was looking back at getting ready for this presentation, because it really was her work looking at it was called the Play Project, PLEY, looking at loose parts and risky play. She does phenomenal work. So she might be someone else that in the future you might want to bring in. They've just finished another project called Play School. Actually, Samantha, you might be interested in that one.
Okay.
So I think that they're doing really phenomenal work.
She reached out to us, so I'm so glad that, I mean, obviously you guys were connected, but you never know.
It's all connected, Small province, right?
Yes, exactly. Okay, Samantha, I'm not sure we have any more time for questions, but I'll let you wrap it up.
Last call for questions. We're good. Okay, great. Thank you so much again. I just have a quick little closing slide that I will share. If you just give me one moment.
I know Nancy also put another comment around Orange Shirt Day in there. If you guys want to take a look at that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And that was, that was a finding that we could unpack a little bit further in one of our papers. We'll get into that finding about kind of these celebration days and the need to kind of embed that, and I think I think this probably is a common knowledge, but just embed that every day in addition to these important, significant days.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you both so much for presenting. Honestly, that was great. We really appreciate you taking your time to come and present today. And thank you as well to all of our attendees. Just a couple things before you hop off. We'd just like to remind you that a recording of this presentation will be available on our website if you'd like to view it again. And lastly, Child Safety Link, we are excited to be launching the Link, which is our online community of practice. It's acting as a bit of a catch-all for child injury prevention tools and resources. So the Link will act as a promotional tool for trainings and events, and networking tool, and ultimately it will bridge the gap between all of our key interested parties. So this community is going to be different from our website and social media pages in that it is specifically designed for professionals who support families and are passionate about children's injury prevention. So if you are interested in joining our community of practice, we would love to have you. And Mallory, I'm not sure if you're still on the line, but I'm hoping you're going to pop a link to register in the chat. Not sure if she's there.
I'm here. I'm just going to go grab it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so Mallory's going to pop that link in the chat if you'd like to register. And that is it. I've included our contact information here if you want to get in touch, if you have any questions. And thank you so much for coming and supporting Child Safety Link.
And I'll just
That's
put a
it.
plug in that I know,
Oh, yeah.
Samantha, you're going to be sending a survey out at some point just to get a bit of feedback from folks around their experiences with our webinar series. I know there was a few glitchy things here and there, but we did do 6 in the end, so we're happy about that. So stay tuned. You will receive a survey at some point in the next week or so, or maybe next couple weeks. Thanks again, everyone. Really appreciate your participation, and thanks to our presenters.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.